All right, in this video, we'll be talking specifically about the categorical imperative. And it's with the categorical imperative that Kant, all kind of the moral philosophy that Kant has is wrapped up in the categorical imperative. Now, Kant actually has three categorical imperatives, and there's debate about whether the last two categorical imperatives are really just special, sort of special cases of the first categorical imperative. So the other two involve treating human individuals as ends in themselves and never as a means to an end only. And then the third one involves considering human individuals, as autonomous and free-willed individuals. But for the sake of time, we're just going to specifically be talking about the first formulation of the categorical imperative. Okay, now, when we're talking about imperatives, we're just talking about commands. Now, so a command is just a certain kind of speech act where there's an intention on the individual performing the speech act that it actually be followed through on. So in cases of sarcasm and things like that, you can express a sentence in the imperative mood without actually giving a command. So for example, if you call a friend of yours and you said, "Hey, I got the job," and your friend says, "Shut up," they're not telling you to be quiet. They're not telling you to stop telling them about you getting the job. It would be odd for you to go, "Oh, well, okay, I guess I'll talk to you later," or "Shut the front door." Well, is it open? No, it's just kind of a term of expression here. It's used in a non-technical sense. Now, but if I look at one of my children and I say, stop dipping your toy into the fish tank. I'm not just giving an utterance for, as an expression. That's it's a command that I actually intend my children to follow through on. I'm not just using the command lightly. All right, so there are interesting questions here as to what is necessary to actually give a command, but here we're using command in that straightforward sense. All right, now, but there are two different kinds of commands that Kant talks about. So one command is hypothetical. So a hypothetical command is a command that ought to be followed, or a command that we do actually follow for the sake of something else. So a hypothetical command would be based on certain contingent circumstances, or following through on the command is a means to some other end. So for example, if I give you the recommendation of if you want to get a good grade, then you should study, or if you want to get a good grade, study. The command to study depends entirely on whether or not you care about getting a good grade. Or if somebody tells me, "Hey, John, if you want to get a good parking space at the Blake Shelton concert, then leave your house by 2 p.m." I'm not going to be leaving my house by 2 p.m. I'm not going to follow through. Why? I don't care about getting a good parking space at the Blake Shelton concert. You couldn't pay me enough to go to a Blake Shelton concert. All right, so those are all hypotheticals. Or if one of my children comes up to me and says, "Hey, can I have a cookie before dinner?" And I say this, if mommy says no, then don't have a cookie. So the command "don't have a cookie" depends entirely on what mom actually says, and then of course my kids will go to my wife and she'll say, "Well, if dad says no, then no," and we'll play ping pong back and forth like this. So whether or not one of the kids can have a cookie, well, whether or not it's prohibited to have a cookie or not depends upon what the parent says. So that would be a hypothetical imperative. That is contingent. Now, categorical imperatives, on the other hand, don't work this way. A categorical imperative is a command that we follow as an end in itself. So it's not, if you want to get a good grade, study. It would be something like, "Do not murder." The command "do not murder" is the kind of thing that's exceptionless and absolute. So why ought we not murder people? Well, because it's wrong to murder people. So the command itself, obeying the command itself, is the end in itself here. So since categorical imperatives are non-conditioned. They're unconditional commands. They're commands that we ought to follow in all circumstances, since they don't have any qualifications or exceptions built into them. They're universal and absolute for that reason. All right. Okay. Now, the first formulation of the categorical imperative that Kant gives is this. It is act only in such a way that the maxim upon which you are acting could become a universal law. So act only in such a way that the maxim upon which you are acting could become a universal law. Other translations are always act in such a way that the maxim upon which you are acting could become a universal law, or always act in such a way so that the maxim upon which you are acting could itself become a universal law, that kind of thing. Okay, so the two crucial considerations here for maxims are, or for the categorical imperative, is what is a maxim, and what does it mean to say that a maxim is universalizable, or a maxim is capable of being universalized? Okay, now, sometimes maxims are discussed in terms of intentions. No. Maxims will involve intentions, but maxims are not reducible to intentions. So if somebody says, well, the maxim behind the action is just the intention behind it, that is not true. That's an incorrect formulation of what a maxim actually is. And keep in mind, as I mentioned in the previous video, your intentions can be determined by things outside of you. So again, it's not enough to intend the right thing. You have to will the right thing. Okay, so more appropriately, this is what a maxim is. A maxim is a principle of action or a subjective law that we create for ourselves. So a maxim is a principle of action or a subjective law that we create for ourselves. So when it comes to maxims, first of all, it's not a requirement that we all have the same maxims. So our maxims can be completely different. So I have certain aspirations in life as a professional philosopher that other individuals or even other philosophers don't have. Depending on your life circumstances, you might have certain goals that you want to reach, and that's perfectly fine. So nowhere does it say that we all need to be motivated by exactly the same maxims, because in all due honesty, one person's maxims may not work circumstantially for another individual. Now, so as a subjective law or as a principle of action, this is what maxims are. A maxim will have, first of all, a characteristic goal. This is just why you're doing what you're doing in the strictest sense. Some understanding of why that goal is worthwhile, and then also a means for attaining the goal. So every maxim as a subjective law or principle of action will have a characteristic goal, an understanding of why that goal is worthwhile, and then some kind of means for attaining it. So when it comes to our maxims, we need to make sure that our maxims are rationally well thought out and our maxims are clear. So with respect to those three characteristic components of a maxim, if one of those things is somewhat irrational, or one of those things is the kind of thing that you're not too clear on, then that should be an indication that you ought to think twice about whether that maxim is worth acting upon. Okay, so for example, let me move this back up here. So suppose I have this characteristic goal. Suppose I have the characteristic goal of losing 20 pounds. And as far as understanding of why this goal is worthwhile, I believe that losing 20 pounds will not only improve my health, but it will also improve my self-image. So, I suppose, I have some negative body image issues and things like that. I don't like the way I look. I feel as if I'm overweight. And losing 20 pounds would actually improve my self-image and my sense of self-worth. Now, and suppose I come up with this means for attaining this goal. I say, okay, I want to lose 20 pounds. I'll increase my health by doing so and my self-image, and this is what I'm going to do. I am going to wake up at 4 a.m. every morning to go jogging. That is my means for attaining that goal. Now, it seems that 1 and 2 are perfectly fine. I mean, so I am in a position where I could lose 20 pounds. I mean, for some people, losing 20 pounds would actually not be a healthy thing to do. And this does seem to be a worthwhile goal. But how realistic are the means for attaining this goal? I mean, so this is the kind of thing that people do, every New Year's Eve. Well, starting tomorrow, I'm getting out of bed at 4 a.m. and going jogging. For most people, as soon as their alarm clock goes off at 3 a.m. or 3:30 or whatever, there's no way they're getting out of bed. They're going to shut their alarm off and say, "I'll start tomorrow," and then the day after that, "I'll start tomorrow." So, depending on the kind of person you are, you may not have the kind of self-discipline necessary to get out of bed at 4 a.m. every morning. So I know that I am not, if I'm being honest with myself, I know that I am not the kind of person who has the self-discipline to get out of bed at 4 a.m. every morning to go jogging. I know I'm the kind of person, as soon as my alarm goes off, I'm going to go, nope, we all got to die of something. And for me, it'll just be gout. Or something like that. I know I'm not. So for me, this would not be a good maxim. It's not a realistic maxim for me to act upon, precisely because the third point, rationally, if I'm being honest with myself, the third point rationally is not the kind of thing that I think I can really accomplish. So this would be a perfectly good maxim for some other person. I'm sure there are people out there that get up at 4 a.m. in the morning to go jogging, and they actually really enjoy it, rain or shine, 25 degree below zero weather, tornado, hurricane, you name it. But I am not one of those people. So if I want to lose 20 pounds, realistically, rationally, I'm going to have to come up with some other means for attaining this goal. So that's why we need to think through our maxims carefully. If any one of those things, again, you're not quite sure of, you ought to think about reformulating your maxim. You want to think a little harder about it, okay? Now, the other concern here is what it means for a maxim to be universalizable. So if these maxims are these subjective laws that we think about rationally, we create for ourselves, and then we will ourselves to act in accordance with, what does it then mean to say that a maxim is capable of becoming a universal law? All right, so here, with respect to whether or not a maxim can become a universal law, there are two kinds of primary considerations that we have here. Okay, so the first is this. Is the maxim actually consistent? So what we mean by whether or not the maxim is consistent, we mean, could everyone in principle accomplish their goals when acting on this maxim? So even though we're not all required to have the same maxims, whether or not the maxim is universalizable is not a question of whether everybody actually has it. It's a question of whether everybody could have it. So in principle, the maxim is universalizable in principle. If everyone acted upon this maxim, they all could in principle accomplish their goals or realize their goals. So that's the first sense of what it means for a maxim to be universalizable. Now, the second sense is it the kind of thing that we could will all rational beings to act in accordance with? Now, and by this we don't mean that through your individual act of will you could compel or force other individuals to act in accordance with the maxim. That's not what this means. What we mean when we are asking the question, is it the kind of thing we could will all rational beings to act in accordance with? It's the idea that if every rational being acted in accordance with this maxim, we wouldn't have a problem with it. So if the answer to the question is no, so if you say, well, this is a perfectly fine maxim for me to act upon, but it's not a fine maxim for this other individual to act upon, that's an indication that it's not universalizable. Now, and to illustrate this, we're going to talk about one of the more controversial claims that Kant makes, and that is that lying is always wrong. So Kant does not think that there are any rational circumstances where we are morally permitted to tell a lie. Okay, now why is that? Well, Kant has at least three different arguments for why lying is always wrong, but since we're talking about the categorical imperative here, we'll talk specifically about how lying applies to the categorical imperative. Okay, So suppose this is the maxim, a lying maxim that we are going to be entertaining. Suppose we're going to act on the maxim of always lie whenever you deem it necessary to get out of a tricky situation to avoid harm, embarrassment, or potentially bad consequences. So always lie whenever you deem it necessary to save yourself from embarrassment or to protect others from harm or to avoid bad or negative consequences. Okay? And then we ask ourselves, all right, well, what if everybody acted this way? What if everybody lied whenever they, as an individual, deemed that it was necessary to tell a lie? What would happen? Is this the kind of maxim that everybody could consistently act upon? Well, it seems pretty clear that the answer is no. And here is why. In order for my lies to work, other people need to be truthful, right? What's the entire point of telling a lie? You tell a lie when you express a proposition that you yourself believe is false with the intention of getting somebody else to believe that proposition that you yourself think is false. So when you tell a lie, you express a proposition that you yourself believe is false with the intention to deceive. Now, but in order for lies to work, you need to pass them off as if they are actually true. So some people are bad liars precisely because they have a hard time making their lies sound believable. I mean, so when the 4-year-old daughter has chocolate smeared all over her face and I say, "Did you eat the chocolate?" and she says, "No, not at all." I mean, clearly that's a bad lie under the circumstances. But in order for lies to work, other people need to be truthful. So if we lied to each other all the time, none of our lies would work. Why? Because if we sort of compulsively lied in this kind of way, we wouldn't ever believe anything that anybody ever says. We would be completely distrusting of other individuals. So the only reason why lies work is because in general, we think that people tell the truth. But if we all lied all the time, none of our lies would work, and hence the point of lying would be pointless. If we all lied all the time, none of our lies would work, and since the point of lying is for it to work, it completely defeats the purpose of telling a lie. So if we all lied, if we all acted on this maxim, it would completely defeat the purpose of lying. So Kant thinks that the act of lying is itself a contradictory action. So the liar in the act of lying shows complete disregard for the truth. But in order for the lie to work, they need to have some regard for the truth. So the liar has both complete disregard for the truth and some regard for the truth, and that is a contradiction. So in the act of lying, the liar completely disregards the truth, but in order for the lie to work, they need to have some regard for the truth. So they both have some regard for the truth and no regard for the truth, and that is clearly a contradiction. So lying is a contradictory and inconsistent action, and inconsistent actions are always irrational, and it's always morally wrong to be irrational, since what is right is determined by the rational moral law. All right, now the other concern here with the other formulation of universalizability is whether or not it's the kind of thing we could will all rational beings to act in accordance with. Okay, so Kant might say something like this. When we tell lies, we find a way of excusing ourselves. So when I tell lies, I find a way to justify it. But when other people lie to me, I want to hold their feet to the fire. So I tell myself it is permissible for me to tell lies to others, but it is not permissible for people to tell lies to me. So if I lie to you, I'm going to say, well, I had a good reason to. You just don't understand, in some sort of paternalistic fashion. But if you lie to me, I will unfriend you on Facebook. I will block you. I will not show up at your birthday party, and those kinds of things. So what am I actually doing here? Well, what I'm doing is I'm making myself an exception to a rule that I expect other people to follow. And it's abundantly clear that that is blatantly inconsistent. So if I demand that other people follow the rules, but I myself allow myself to break the rules, I am making myself an exception to the rule. Well, good rules are going to be exceptionless. So a moral law is not going to have any exceptions built into it. So I can't make myself an exception to the moral law. So since excusing my own lies, but holding other people responsible for their lies would be blatantly inconsistent. To the extent it is rational to hold people accountable for their lies, I need to be held accountable for my lies as well. So that is one reason why it is always wrong to lie. All right. Okay. Now there are other applications here of the categorical imperative that we could discuss here, but lying is kind of the primary one. All right. Okay. Hope you've enjoyed this very short section on deontology, particularly Kantian deontology. And as always, if you have any questions, please email me.